Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janabala Bhagiri Varadhari. Gopi Janabala Bhagiri Varadhari. Yasodanandana Braja Janarandana. Yasodanandana Braja Janarandana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Radha Madhava ki. So, greetings on Wednesday. We're going to continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the second canto, and then it's chapter 8. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading several verses, so I'd like to have readers in the audience. Text starting with text 17.
Please explain all the different ages and the duration of the creation, and also the duration of such ages. Also tell me about the different activities of the different incarnations of the Lord in different ages.
So who's speaking here? Remember? King Pariksha to who? Shukadeva Goswami, yes.
Please explain all the different ages and the duration of creation, and also please also explain what may generally be the common religious affiliations in human society, as well as their specific occupational duties in religion, the classification of the social orders, as well as the administrative royal orders, and the religious principles for one who may be in distress.
So one thing, when we're hearing this list, he's asking all these things, can you share all these things? So if anything piques your interest, you know it's available to study in the Bhagavatam, right? Those are the things that are going to be discussed. So just notice if anything you want to read more, if you want to continue on this topic. Okay, next verse. Text 19.
Kindly explain all about the elementary principles of creation, the number of such elementary principles, their causes and their development, and also the process of devotional service and the method of mystic powers.
What are the appearances of the great mystic and what is their ultimate realization? How does the perfect mystic becomes detached from the substance astral body? What is the basic knowledge of Vedic literatures, including the branches of history and the supplementary Puranas?
Please explain unto me how the living beings are generated, how they're maintained, and how they're annihilated. Tell me also of the advantages and disadvantages of discharging devotional service unto the Lord. What are the Vedic rituals and injunctions of the supplementary Vedic rites? And what are the procedures of religion, economic development, and sense satisfaction?
Please also explain how, merged in the body of the Lord, living beings are created and how the infidels appear in the world. Also, please explain how unconditioned living entities exist.
Anyone know what the word infidel means? Yeah, maybe, Chris, can you pull up the exact definition?
Someone who does not believe in a particular religion or has no religion.
Okay. So we tend to think of it, it's kind of a neutral definition actually, but the word itself has some sting to it, right? The infidels. Okay, next verse, text 23.
The independent personality of Godhead enjoys his pastimes by his internal potency, and at the time of annihilation gives them up to the external potency, and he remains in it all.
O great sage, representative of the Lord, kindly satisfy my inquisitiveness in all that I have inquired from you, in all that I may have inquired from you in the very beginning of my questioning. Since I am a soul surrendered unto you, please impart full knowledge in this connection.
Yeah, and so there's one sentence in this purport where Prabhupada says that Maharaj Parikshit was anxious to know about what he has not been able to inquire about too. So the things he's asking and everything else. That reminds me of and there was a children's book. I think it was, Sesame Street Grover is a character, right? So he went to a museum. It's a museum of everything in the whole wide world. And so he's going into every room, like everything large, everything small in the world, everything that makes sound or whatever. It's just like different rooms of this museum. And at the end, there's a doorway and it says everything else with an arrow. And then he walks out and it's just the regular world, like outside the museum, just like that. So everything else, right? Everything else. So in case we forget to ask something, then we, Parikshit Maharaj is saying, just impart whatever is important for me to hear. Okay, and then finally, text 25. So we will, do we finish 24? Yes. Okay, so we'll do text 25 with the Sanskrit. I'll just read the translation. O great sage, you are as good as Brahma, the original living being. Others follow custom only, as followed by the previous philosophical speculators. So let's do the Sanskrit for that. Atra pramanam hi bhavan. And actually there's a word there, pramanam. Does anyone know what that means? Proof, evidential proof, right? So the based on evidence, the evidences of how we know what we know. So the pramanam. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And so I want you to notice that word. Atra pramanam hi bhavan parameshti yatatmabhu apare chanutishtanti purvesham purvajay kritam.
Pramanam hi bhavan.
Pramanam hi bhavan parameshti yatatmabhu apare chanutishtanti purvesham purvajay kritam. Atra pramanam hi bhavan parameshti yatamapu aparetana drishtanti purvesham. Let's do the word for word together. Atra, in this matter, pramanam, evidential facts, he, certainly, bhavan, yourself, parameshti, Brahma, the creator of the universe, yata, as, atma bhu, born directly from the Lord, apade, others, cha, only, anunishtanti, just to follow, purvesham, as a matter of custom, purvajai, knowledge suggested by a previous philosopher, kritam, having been done. O great sage, you are as good as Brahma, the original living being. Others follow custom only, as followed by the previous philosophical speculators. So in this Sanskrit, the description of Brahma was given as one who's born directly from the Lord, right? Did you catch that? That's Brahma there. Purport. It may be argued that Shukadeva Goswami is not the only authority of perfect knowledge in transcendence, because there are many other sages and their followers. Contemporary to Vyasadeva, or even prior to him, there were many other great sages, such as Gautama, Kanada, Jaimini, Kapila, and Ashtavakra, and all of them have presented a philosophical path by themselves. Patanjali is also one of them, and all these 6 great rishis have their own way of thinking, exactly like the modern philosophers and mental speculators. The difference between the 6 philosophical paths put forward by the renowned sages above mentioned and that of Shukadeva Goswami, as presented in Srimad Bhagavatam, is that all the 6 sages mentioned above speak the facts according to their own thinking, but Shukadeva Goswami presents the knowledge which comes down directly from Ramaji, who is known as Atma Bhu, or born of and educated by the Almighty Personality of Godhead. I'd like to have maybe Presence. Could you read the last paragraph?
Vedic transcendental knowledge descends directly from the personality of Godhead. By his mercy, Brahma, the first living being in the universe, was enlightened. And from Brahmaji, Narada was enlightened. From Narada, Vyasa was enlightened. Shukadeva Goswami received such transcendental knowledge directly from his father, Vyasadeva. Thus, the knowledge being received from the chain of disciplic succession is perfect. One cannot be a spiritual master in perfection unless and until one has received the same by disciplic succession. That is the secret of receiving transcendental knowledge. The 6 great sages mentioned above may be great thinkers, but their knowledge by mental speculation is not perfect. However perfect an empiric philosopher may be in presenting a philosophical thesis, such knowledge is never perfect, because it is produced by an imperfect mind. Such great sages also have their disciplic successions, but they are not authorized, because such knowledge does not come directly from the independent Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan. No one can be independent except Narayan. Therefore, no one's knowledge can be perfect, for everyone's knowledge is dependent on the flickering mind. Mind is material, and thus knowledge presented by material speculators is never transcendental and can never become perfect. Mundane philosophers, being imperfect in themselves, disagree with other philosophers, because a mundane philosopher is not a philosopher at all, unless he presents his own theory. Intelligent persons like Maharaj Parikshit do not recognize such mental speculators, however great they may be, but hear from the authorities like Shukadeva Goswami, who is non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead by the Parampara system, as is specifically stressed in the Bhagavad Gita.
Thank you. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shlakaya Chakshur Umritamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. It's interesting how at the second to last sentence there in the purport, Prabhupada says that mundane philosophers, being imperfect in themselves, disagree with other philosophers, because a mundane philosopher is not a philosopher at all unless he presents his own theory, right? And that's kind of the culture of the mundane or materialistic approach to knowledge. I kind of have to be the top shot. I have to share something unique and authentic, or not authentic, but unique and something I've thought of with my brain, and that's what makes me special in the eyes of others who are also materialistically inclined. Whereas the Vedic disciplic succession is very different. It's sharing what has been already learned and already passed down, and there's not that ego, right, of wanting to be recognized for some major like new realization, a new way of sharing something or new philosophical point. So it's minus the ego. That's the real spiritual lineage versus the material one. So what I want to cover today is looking at different ways that we learn knowledge, remember we had that word, the different pramanas. There's 3 types, and we're going to discuss that. And then also looking at the role of the spiritual master in all of this. How does that fit into our learning and our spiritual path? So who knows the 3, just raise your hand if you know the 3 types of pramana or evidence. Okay, so we'll go through it. So some of you know, but most don't. So I'll just mention the types. So, and then we'll say the Sanskrit and the English, right? So you can learn them. So the first one is perception with my own eyes. Like I'm seeing something, therefore I believe it. And that in Sanskrit is called pratyaksha, right? With the eyes, aksha, eyes. So to see and then believe. So what would be an example of that? It would be, I see this cup, therefore I believe this cup is here. I'm seeing it, and it's there. It's evidence of the cup being here because my eyes are seeing it. And what my senses experience becomes my reality. There's also another philosophical school called empiricism. It's also based on that, like what I know by what I can see or can actually tangibly experience. So what happens when, now first I'll come back to this, but first I'll tell you the 3 types, and then we'll look at what happens if you only have one, because you actually need all 3, okay? So the second one is inference. So if I'm going on a nature hike and in the distance I see some smoke, right? Let's say there's far distance, I see some smoke. What is the inference that I'm going to make in my mind when I see the smoke? That there's fire, right? That's immediately you go, oh, we know there's fire. How do we know there's fire? How is that? How does our brain know there's fire when we see smoke? So inference means that a repeated experience with something, then I can infer it logically, because every time I see smoke, there's fire, or at least 99% of the time. Sometimes there's these smoke machines, right? But usually in nature, if I see a big thing of smoke, there's going to be a fire, right? So using my logical reasoning, I can infer that there's a fire. So that's inference, and that's called anuman, right? So we have pratyaksha, direct experience with my senses, and then anuman is inference. And then the third one is shabda. That's verbal testimony. And the way that Jiva Goswami talks about this one, it's a wider thing, verbal testimony. So one who has actually seen it can tell me, right? There's that. However, the way Jiva Goswami hones in on this is that shabda becomes also specifically shastra. The shastra is also shabda, right? So those are 2 ways to define shabda, either the verbal testimony, the wider way, or the more narrow view, just the scripture. So now, and that's where we're talking about in this purport. Prabhupada's talking about the difference between people who just learn from the world with their senses, and the philosophers are thinking a lot and they're coming up with their own idea, right? Versus the parampara, the disciplic succession, which is being handed down the teachings from a lineage. That would be from the shabda side, right? Like from what I heard, and then I'm passing it down without touching it, without changing it. So what happens if we just have one of these and not the other? So we need all 3. So if we just have pratyaksha, what do you think could be one of the things that happens if I just depends solely, like my evidence is solely on what I'm seeing or hearing or touching with my hand, or just my own senses. What's a pitfall of that? The senses are defective, and what are some of the defects of the senses? They're limited, right? So I can't even know for sure if someone's standing right now behind that door. Like, I don't really know. If they're really quiet, it could be somebody creeping out there, right? So we don't know what's even beyond one wall, what to speak of a few buildings away and so on. So it's very limited. What else is another defect? Yeah, so there's and these are wider defects than just the senses, I think, but the tendency to cheat, right? So to be misled or to mislead others. So I'm going to paint something a certain way and kind of affect others with that. Like, I'm going to not give them all of it, or I'm going to share it kind of information wrong. So cheating. What else about the senses is problematic if I'm just using my own senses? Yeah, so I'll make mistakes, right? So I'll infer things, or I will decide things or come up with theories that are inaccurate based on what I'm seeing, because I'm a limited being. So I'll make mistakes. And then what else? Was that the one you were going to, do you want to share another one? Yeah. Yeah, so what you're already inclined to focus on becomes the prominent thing that you repeatedly see. And actually, that's studied also, that when we put our brain, like even just the brain, what we apply our interest in, like if I'm convinced, if I have this belief in my head that everyone hates me, right? Then what happens is that we start to notice that we build evidence based on what we think. Like even if it's a fallacy, like an inaccurate point that we believe, we start to build evidence on that. So it's very subjective. Every one of us is looking at this room and this experience with our own kind of unique play of, the brain and the chemistry. Everything's a little unique. So we have our own sort of lens that we're seeing this room even, right? What to speak of the wider world. So yeah, there's very problematic to just base it solely on that. So I'll give you a couple examples of what can happen. So if I'm just looking at things with just my eyes and I think that's reality, then I will think that the sun is about this big. Like a lot of times, if I could just say, oh, the sun is pretty small, it's like, right, I'm looking at the sky, like about that big. I could put my thumb on. You see photos taken, photographers, they'll play with that, where they'll like hold the sun like on the beach with their hands. So it looks very tiny. Or swallow it, yeah, they'll play with the images. You know what I'm talking about? The photographers will do that with the dimensions. So the sun is one. And then the other example would be, I've never visited Japan, for instance. I've never seen it with my own eyes, so I'm just not going to believe that it exists. It doesn't exist because I never saw it or never went there, right? So you can see how quickly it becomes kind of foolish. And there was one philosopher. A lot of this, what I'm sharing there's a really nice booklet, actually, it's printed by the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And if you're interested later, I can share it with you. Radhika Raman Prabhu and Chaitanya Charan, they were having a conversation about this 3 types of pramana. And so I was reading through that and getting some tips here to share. So there was one philosopher named David Hume, and he was known for being an extreme skeptic. And he said that I can't believe that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, even though there have been millions of times that the sun has risen at that same time. Why? Because we can't know that. There's no inference allowed. There's no shabda, right? It's just purely what I'm going to see is what I believe. So I'm only going to believe it if I actually see the sun rising at the same time. So you can see how quickly it can get really, it can get kind of egotistical too. Like, I'm just this huge skeptic. I'm not gonna believe anything I don't see myself. Okay? So then the next one is inference, and that one kind of goes together with the perception. You can't really separate those two, because you first need to see something, observe it, and then to make the inference, right? So those I'll kind of keep together. But there was another example I was going to give with this one. So we had the one with the smoke and the fire. So another example would be, for those of you who've ever worn glasses, when it's cold out and you walk into a room that's warm, right? It's like the glasses will fog up. So even if you don't personally wear glasses, if you see someone going into a room where it's warmer and then they come out and their glasses are all fogged, you'll know, you can make the inference that the room is warm compared to the outside, right? So things like that, you can just know it because that's what happens to glass when it goes into a warmer climate. So then let's look at the third one about what happens when we only look at scripture and we disregard the first two. What happens? What are some of the potential pitfalls of that? What do you think? Yes, and can you use the microphone so I can hear you?
So you could pick the wrong source of information.
Yeah. So you could be completely believing something that may not even be true and like loyal to that, right? To that particular viewpoint. Yeah.
One point, because I was thinking about it, the Anumana, which inference, is it necessary that it has to be based on Pratyaksha, or can it be independent of it?
Yeah, that's a question that I think that booklet will answer. I only got about halfway into it, so I think they're going to get more into that. But I don't know, maybe someone else here knows that. Like for me, just when I first thought of it, I thought, well, it has to kind of be based on some substance of something. To infer, you need to first have, but I may be wrong with that.
My interpretation is it could be completely logical.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can be just based on logic. So that's not necessarily a Pratyaksha.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
I have had the same thought, but I mean, the logic's still got to be based on something you observe. To the same extent, like Shabda has to be taken in through Pratyaksha, right? We can't learn things from scripture without reading them through our senses, hearing them through our ears.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I'm trying to think of a case where you could do something logically with no observation whatsoever. Hard to think of something like that that could happen. It's still going to be based on things you see, experience, and then think about that. Yeah, but you learn about mathematics through reading about them, and then making inferences about the things that you read. Perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps there's some cases like that where it's, yes. Can you pass the microphone behind?
Before the invention of the, I guess you can call it James Webb telescope, astronomers could see into the night sky, but like there's a point where, like I think is it Neptune or Uranus onwards, you can only deduce its presence by changing sun positions when you look at the night sky. Most of these illustrations that we see of galaxies are, artists, black holes and the like. They're perceptions of an artist who have drawn it for us to better understand, because the electromagnetic waves would not match colors which we can perceive.
Right, yes.
It's all logical.
It's a good example. Yeah, and I thought of another one too that historically there were a lot of errors before people had the tools to look deeper, either further like with telescopes or closer with microscopes, right? There was another for years people thought that you couldn't get sick, like there was a whole, before they realized there was germs, right? There was just, people would sneeze, they would all be near each other. They didn't realize that by sneezing there's some microscopic thing being passed. Like it almost, to many people when they first started hearing about that theory, they thought that was ridiculous. Like, how's that possible? We don't see anything like this. So a lot of skepticism can come from not being able to see either far or close, like just with our limited view.
Along the same length in physics also, my understanding is that it's like you don't see the nucleus and all those things in the atom. They're kind of by inference to some degree, because scientists do, when they were setting up the atomic bomb, they would experiment. I don't remember the details, but they would do certain experiments, and then through that they would show, because this happened, it must mean that this was there. So there's some evidence for sure, but there's still a decent amount of inference.
Yeah, yes.
But yeah, the more you go deeper on the less and less, it's more experimental.
Yeah.
That's
I think that's another good example. And I think that we've all been in an experience, at least I know for myself, that I've been in situations where you're trying to talk to somebody and they will not allow any room for inference, right? You're trying to explain a logical point and they're just like, no, I didn't see it, or I don't believe that, no. And you're like saying, well, if this, then it has to be that. And they're like, nope, 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 right? So and that can be really frustrating when someone's not able to do the logical, like, well, if this, then we know that, and then we know that. So that's, inference is really important for progressing our knowledge. But going back to the Shabda one, if we only look at what comes in through scripture, then one of the issues is that we can become blind followers, where we don't know why we believe what we believe, right? We just believe it because we just heard it, and it's just another shortcoming, is that blind following. So if Prabhupada actually many times said Krishna consciousness is a science, and we need to be able to bring all three of these together in Krishna consciousness and make sense of this philosophy. So he said, if somebody comes up to you and says, I'm Krishna, then this is one conversation Prabhupada had. If someone comes up to you and says, I'm God, then you can say to them, well, show me your universal form. So what would that mean? Show me, right? So then the pratyaksha would be activated. Oh, then I'll believe it, right? So so he was just reminding us that, yeah, we don't take things on face value of someone's claim of something, right, on their own, like, oh, I'm God because of I believe I'm God, and therefore you should believe me, right? There has to be all three of these there. And Prabhupada even says that Arjuna also, after hearing so much from Krishna, he still wanted direct evidence. And so he said to Krishna, please show me now what you're describing, like this form. I'd like to see it directly. And so he asked for that. And so that's a bona fide to ask for evidence of something that we can actually relate to. And then the other thing is that it's important to recognize in our mature understanding of scripture that it's actually never supposed to suffocate the other two. They're supposed to all go together. And this is also taken from that little booklet that I was reading. So that phrase, like, it shouldn't suffocate pratyaksha or anumana, right? So shabda should be supportive of and enhancing what we're already experiencing. So here's another example. I'm hearing, and this is something Prabhupada would repeatedly say, one way to make Krishna consciousness a science is to read about it and then to apply it and then to see if it actually pans out in our life. What is actually, do we start to feel that transformation? Do I feel some experience of change? Am I looking around and seeing other people change? So when I come in contact with a great sadhu, great personality, they become part of that evidence. Oh yes, here's someone I'm encountering with pratyaksha, right? I'm seeing them, I'm hearing from them. And it's supportive both ways. The scripture is describing people who their consciousness change as they apply Krishna consciousness. And I'm seeing them, therefore I can believe scripture more, right? And it becomes this supportive cycle. So this is in a very nutshell way. There's a lot more here. Jiva Goswami wrote extensively on this. This is just to give a little brief introduction to the topic. And I'd like to now segue into the spiritual master, the role of the spiritual master. So we were hearing in the purport that the philosophers, Prabhupada was saying the great philosophers, they're not perfect. He kept using this word. They kept saying they're not perfect, right? Their knowledge can't be perfect. Why? Why is it not perfect? Because it's only what? Only based on? Yeah, it's only based on what's happening in their own brain, right? Their imperfect mind. is therefore making it imperfect. So there's missing that major key of the scripture being passed down from Krishna all the way down untouched, right? So they're missing that component, and they're just egotistically thinking, I can figure it out, so I'm going to describe it. So therefore it becomes imperfect. But the spiritual master is one who the knowledge passed on by the spiritual teachers in a ideal situation, the spiritual teachers that we take guidance from are not tainted by this ego. They don't step in between Krishna and us. They don't with their ego, like, oh, look at me. Prabhupada didn't make ISKCON Prabhupada movement, right? He made it Krishna consciousness. He didn't make it about him as a personality. So he would say that the spiritual teacher or the guru has to be a transparent via medium. Transparent, so that if they're there, there's nothing blocking. There's no, it's like a glass, a clear glass. Like you're going to get directly what Krishna originally told, right? Brahma and then down. We're going to get the direct knowledge without the tainted. What happens if there's a quote unquote like spiritual teacher, but they start to get egotistical and they want to make it about themselves, then it doesn't become clear anymore, right? It's like something else is going on, some other things coming in the way. So what we look for in a spiritual teacher is someone who can be that transparent via medium, giving it to us directly as it is, right? Bhagavad Gita as it is. So I'd like to pull up that disciplic succession that's in Bhagavad Gita. So scroll down a little bit and maybe try to zoom in. So in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, there's scroll down to the names. So there's this list. If you take any Bhagavad Gita as it is, you'll see this in the beginning. I think it's at the beginning of the introduction, maybe. Smart. Yeah. So this list is there, and this is the, what does it say right at the top above this? It says, this Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita as it is received through this disciplic succession. Okay, so Evam Param Parapaktam Imam Rajarsha Yogidu, which is actually a verse from Bhagavad Gita. So I just wanted to share with you all that you can actually sing this, and we can do it together. So we can sing it to the melody of the morning tune, morning melody, right? Let's scroll down a little bit. So I'll start off and you can join, okay, as you get it. Krishna Brahma Narada Vyasa Madhva Padmanabha Hari Madhava Akshobhya Jaya Tirtha Jnana Sindhu Dayanidhi Vidyanidhi Rajendra Jaya Dharma Purushottama Brahmanya Tirtha Vyasa Tirtha Lakshmipati Madhavendra Puri. Then it goes up and go Ishvara Puri Nityananda Neta Lord Chaitanya Rupa Sarupa Sanatana Raghunatha Jiva Krishna Dasa Narotama Vishwanatha Baladeva Jagannath Bhakti Vinoda Gaura Kishora Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada. So when we were in Gurukul, we would get like really wild. A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we're like, repeat that. So, but it's just a fun way to engage the mind, just to sing it, right? To feel like it becomes more alive. And then of course to note that every great acharya, that one of the ways in which they're a great acharya is that they can make other great acharyas, right? So the disciplic succession does not end, and that there's a kind of a rift in the devotional community where there's a group of people who think, well, that's it ends there, and there's no one else that's worthy or able to be a diksha guru, right? So that school of thought is not what Srila Prabhupada taught. So after Srila Prabhupada, then we have our diksha guru, and then we have our shiksha gurus, right? And we have all these personalities who help us be that they're that transparent via medium for us, and they help us to understand what's being passed down. So how we know that they're not messing it up is that there's an example given that they're, if someone delivers your mail, you can trust that the person delivering your mail, if they're a legit person working for the postal office, they have not opened the letter and checked it out first before putting it in the box, right? They've just handed it directly. They're like, they're not interfering with the mail. And the other example is of a tree where, has anyone here picked fruit from a tree? Okay, a lot of you have picked fruit from a tree. Or, coconuts. I think in India too, they have like, they don't want to just drop it from way up there because then it's going to crack open and all the water, right, it's going to fall out. So they hand it down. And if you hand it down gently, it's going to arrive in the same shape that it was in at the top of the tree, especially a mango, if you think about it. It's like they get bruised easily, but if it's handed very gently and very carefully, then you receive it the same way. So that's what's to be expected when we're following a great teacher, a spiritual teacher, spiritual master. Both our Diksha Guru and our Shiksha Gurus, we're expecting to receive untainted and same condition Shabda, right? That knowledge from the scripture and from the great teachers. And then at the same time, so it's unchanged, and at the same time, Prabhupada said, according to time, place, and circumstance, there can be some changes. And this is where it becomes we have to use our intelligence and take guidance from the previous teachers in our disciplic succession. There's a quote here from Prabhupada in Mayapur. He gave a lecture in 1976. So he said, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu presented the philosophy of Achintya Beda Beda Tattva. So simultaneously one and different, right? From us and Krishna. That is Acharya. Acharya gives some way for simple understanding. The same conclusion, but according to the time circumstances, they give a very easy method to understand. That is Acharya. Acharya is following strictly the previous Acharya, but according to the circumstances, he may make little changes. That change is not changing the original idea, though. So he says that change is not change from the original idea. No, that's how it ends up. No. So basically, not changing the substance or the principles of Krishna consciousness, yet according to the time, place, and circumstance, we can make changes. There's a place in Chaitanya Charitamrita where Prabhupada, he actually mentions this too. And this is an example of a change. Prabhupada actually himself made some adjustments, right? He opened ashrams for women in the United States, Europe, in India even. He just had ashrams for Vaishnavis who wanted to also live celibate lives of devotion. That was not previously very common at all in India. It was kind of a new, something for the Gaudiya Math. It was definitely a new adjustment. And yet Prabhupada found it very important for the Western outreach to have that, right? So we also have to be thoughtful and make adjustments. And we do at Krishna House, right? So one of the things that in Chaitanya Charitamrita, as an example, Prabhupada said, sometimes the members of ISKCON, especially in the Western countries, find it difficult to approach people to distribute books because people are unfamiliar with the traditional saffron robes of the devotees. The devotees have therefore inquired whether they can wear European and American dress before the general public. From the instructions given to King Prataparudra by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, we can understand that we may change our dress in any way to facilitate our service. It's quite a liberal statement, right? And this is just one example, it's a dress, but the mood of the acharyas is the principle is sharing Krishna with others and helping them come to Krishna, and that any of the details can be adjusted to accommodate that, the souls coming to Krishna. When our members change their dress to meet the public or to introduce our books, they are not breaking the devotional principles. The real principle is to spread Krishna consciousness movement, and if one has to change into regular Western dress for this purpose, there should be no objection. So that's in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And the role of the guru is to help us distinguish what's a principle of Krishna consciousness and what's a detail. And we talk a lot about that at Krishna House. It was actually one of my favorite things about Krishna House when I came in the early classes. Kalakanta Prabhu would help us untangle that and help me realize, oh my gosh, it's not all just one monogamous, or not monogamous, monolithic. Yeah, just all the same one equally important thing. It's actually applying intelligence and going, okay, what are the principles of Krishna consciousness and what are the details that can be adjusted according to the time, place, and circumstance? And how do we know that? So one of the ways we know that is from Nectar of Devotion. And in there, Rupa Goswami in chapter 6 talks about the essential principles of bhakti. And guess what the first one is? Based on what we're talking about, what do you think the first principle that's mentioned here is? Accepting what's favorable? It's a good one, but we're just talking about the role of the spiritual master, right? So so the first one, the basic principles, the first one is accepting the shelter of the lotus feet of a bona fide spiritual master. So the spiritual master is listed as one of the principles of Krishna consciousness. So we have to have the spiritual master in our life. And then the spiritual master helps us with this whole list and how to apply it to our life and to distinguish what becomes the essence and what becomes the detail. And for us, it's very simple. What are the principles of Krishna consciousness? What is the main principle? Yeah, Rupa Goswami again, he says, always remember Krishna and never forget him. That's really broad and that's really essential. And what else? What's the principle that is, and how we know it never changes according to time, place, and circumstance. It's always remaining the same. What is that? Accept what's favorable, reject what's not favorable. Okay, what else? Chant the holy names, right? That's always there, part of our scriptural, part of our philosophy, connecting with Krishna. Connect with devotees, associate with devotees? Yeah, always being around devotees, yeah. So as much, if it's available, we always want to be in the company of devotees. Anything else that comes to mind for you? Srimad Bhagavatam? Yeah. Yes. Reading and studying Srimad Bhagavatam. And if you think about it, that can be done anywhere, even if you're in some prison somewhere, right? You can smuggle in a Gita or Bhagavatam, or you can just talk to others about it, right? So these are things that can be applied to any circumstance. The holy name, again, can be chanted in the mind. If everything is stripped away. I used to get really inspired by these books of Christians that were, I mean, they're heavy books, but Christians who were tortured in the Soviet Union back in the day, right? And they would hold, there was one particular book that was really touched me. This man was deepening his faith even through this torture. And he would, in his mind, because he couldn't say anything out loud because then they would torture him more, but in his mind, he was constantly praying and like saying the name of God and like just really meditating in that way. And we have Prahlad Maharaj as an example too. What else is a principle of Krishna consciousness? Sharing it with others, yeah. And we saw that in that purport that I just read to you, that Prabhupada says the real principle is to spread Krishna consciousness. And how that's done is the detail, right? How that's done. So those are the main ones. Anything else? Yeah. To reside in a holy place, yeah. So if we're not able to physically be there, what do? We reside there in our consciousness, right? So, but definitely the purpose is to kind of go there or to create a holy place among ourselves. So anyway, if you want more of that understanding of what the principles are, you can study Nectar of Devotion. It just helps to know where it's coming from. So just to reiterate what we were talking about, we're discussing the pramana, right? The three types. Remember the Sanskrit names for them? For direct perception, pratyaksha, anuman, inference, and shabda, scripture, right? The scripture or the verbal testimony from the teachers who are presenting the scripture, the acharyas. And then we talked about the guru. The role of the guru is to hand down the mango, untouched, unbruised, right, directly, be a transparent via medium of that succession, and pass it on to us without anything getting in the way, no ego. And at the same time, there's room for some changes when it comes to the detail of how to apply this in our lives, in our current situation, and how to make it palatable to the UF alumni or UF students right now. How do we do that? Then that's where it becomes really exciting. Krishna consciousness is really fun because you can brainstorm, like, what are some of the details that I can do that would attract the students more? Like, what would be some things that interest them, and how can we relate with them? And that's the constant project of Krishna House and anyone who's wanting to share, right, with others. So any question or comment? Yes, can you pass the microphone over?
Thank you.
I remember hearing a class by Guru Maharaj 15 years ago, and he was talking about his role of spiritual master. He said, some people claim, I don't want anybody between me and God. He was bringing up that argument. He said, he gave an example of glasses. Yes, it's something between you, your vision, and an object, but it actually helps you to see.
I love that. Yes, that's such a good example, right? For anyone who's ever worn glasses, even if you put it on for a play or something, right? If you don't normally wear them, but you put them on for a drama. If they're tainted, if the glass is tainted or covered, then all of a sudden they're an impediment. But they're supposed to be helpful, right? The purpose of them is so clear and transparent that you kind of forget that you're wearing them. When you first, if anyone's first putting on glasses, you might first notice like the edge and stuff. But after a while, it just becomes like this thing where you just see the world more clearly, and there's no impeding. Right? That's a really good analogy. Any other question or comment? Yes.
Hi Krishna, thank you for the class. You're mentioning, there's 3 different ways to learn knowledge, and then they must all be in alignment. And you mentioned like if we just have faith in scriptures without like really seeing it or inferring it, it could be blind faith. So I was thinking like some things we can understand in this life, we can see and we can infer, and it makes sense. They all align. For example, like you can see how chanting can affect us, and we can do that experiment and feel the effects of it. But then some things in the scriptures we really can't understand through inference or even like seeing it. For example, like the stories in the Bhagavatam of like Krishna coming as a big turtle, or Shingadev. If you try to explain it to someone, I had some friends in the past in college who said, okay, we can understand the meditation part, but this part, it just doesn't make sense. So how can we explain that? And does that all need to be in alignment?
That's what the Bhaktivedanta Institute is trying to resolve, to make that so that we have answers to these harder questions. Like, and sometimes by building faith in the more tangible things and widening our scope of, we realize, oh, there's actually more beyond what I know, because there's like, I'm experiencing that as I practice. Then we start to widen our, how do you say it, become more open-minded, like, oh yeah, maybe there is room for more subtle things. We start to experience the subtle body more and this and that, and then maybe there's room for that, and we start to kind of widen our possibility. And yet at the same time, you're right that there's some parts of the scripture that we just take on face value because of all the other ways in which it has shown true for us, right? We have yet to maybe meet Krishna face to face in that direct with our eyes, and yet we believe he exists because of everything else that we're experiencing in our Krishna consciousness and because of what we've been told. So there's both, like, the building our own faith can allow openness for new possibility, and then also believing the great acharyas who have passed it down from Krishna, like the civic session starting from Krishna. So as it's like a both way thing, like as we deepen our own faith, we also deepen our faith in the things that feel impossible, and we open our mind to things that we don't know. So there's a lot of skepticism in the material world, right? Naturally, because we want to have proof for everything that we see. Yes, you want to add something?
About faith, Bhakti Maharaj was recently giving a class on science versus spiritual practice, and he said any faith, he said any belief, be it scientific science and the knowledge, it has to begin by foundational faith. Like, for example, he says we have all this amazing physics, amazing chemistry knowledge, but it all rooted in a basic foundation of faith of some. You have to start from a faith. You can't start from an element. So we take up on faith that there is this big explosion happening. So any path you choose, whether it's scientific or spiritual, it begins with faith. So even the scientists or the great chemists, they have to, the path starts with faith. Everything you choose starts with faith. So sometimes we criticize for, you just fanatics in faith and that went over there is God. To take any core science, it all based on the foundation of some sort of faith into something first, and then they build blocks upon that.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Even in our schooling, like we have to have faith in the teacher who's teaching us the math, right? There's a certain faith starting. The other thing I would just add to that is that if somebody's having trouble with like, oh, why is there a turtle incarnation? It's just like too far out, right? What I've done in my own life is I've kind of tabled some things that are not essential. Like they're like maybe later let that inspiration or that divine, there's going to be some divine revelation of that personality or something. But right now I can't really understand it. So let me just focus on what I do understand and what does work and see how that builds my faith. So start where it actually, where they can relate and what does work. So yeah, I hope that helps a little bit. And then Sindri had.
Thank you so much for your class. I really appreciate like this class because I think I really needed to understand the three different pramanas, and it's important, their roles in our devotional life. I didn't realize before that that all three is like said to be actually important. It's not just that Shabda is important, and the other two are not. Somehow had that bias or somehow misunderstanding, maybe from the first Bhakti course I took, and that was kind of the information I got. So I have I've recently, like this week or past week, I've been really, been given the opportunity to rethink like some of the things I've been taught, and I'm like, is that really true though? Like, don't we all need a little bit of reason and also proof to help us understand the scriptures? Are we really just supposed to like just believe it and not question? So just wanted to share that because thank you for bringing this point up. It's really, really important.
Thank you for sharing that. We don't need to be scared of that when that comes up. We're all going to have moments like that. Like, is this really true? That doesn't need to be a scary thought. It's just a natural, it's actually healthy. Prabhupada wanted us to be questioners and ask questions. And repeatedly throughout scripture, we see Parikshit Maharaj asking questions, and then Arjuna asking questions, and like, even raising doubts and confusion. And that's all part of what Prabhupada wanted for us to be thoughtful members of the society, bring our questions, bring our doubts, and start to raise these as discussions, and it uplifts the intellectual quality of the whole community, right? When we're like that. So I appreciate you sharing. We are 10 minutes after, so I don't know. Okay, if it's quick, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I've noticed that we're using this as a ruler to measure the world, but if you turn this process inward about your own thoughts, like you observe your thoughts going through, where they're coming from, what's inferring it, like one thought leads to another, and where, like, have I heard this before? Like almost like, where have I read this? I think it's a valuable tool for self-realization in inner states compared to just measuring material things.
Good point. Yeah, self-reflection. And even therapeutic processes like cognitive behavioral therapy, they're based on that kind of thing too. Like questioning my own thoughts, like, where is this coming from? Is this actually true? Like doing a lot of that internal. So thank you all so much.